Mistakes, we all make them as real estate investors, but there are 5 mistakes in particular that I'm seeing pretty often with real estate investors who are trying to buy investment properties right now in 2022. And in this podcast episode and video, I want to share with you what those mistakes are and how you can help overcome them so you can buy your next investment property more successfully. Welcome to the Real Estate and Financial Independence Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and this is a show all about helping you get out of the financial grind so you can do more of what matters. This is a special midweek episode of the podcast, and the reason I'm doing this is this week, the entire week, is open enrollment for my course, Real Estate Deal School. It only happens twice per year, happens in the spring, happens in the fall, and this course is all about deal making. It's really the best practices I've built over the last 20 years of how do you find, finance, negotiate, and acquire good investment properties. It's really where the entire business starts. There are other important parts. Of course, you have to manage the property. You got to learn how to sell it. You got to do your taxes. But getting a good deal is really what it's all about. It makes everything else easier. And I've learned a thing or two about the patterns that students are facing or the challenges that you're having as investors when you're trying to buy properties. And I know in 2022, from talking to a lot of you, there can be a struggle with the competition, the changes in the market, the dynamics that are making it difficult to cash flow properties. I know that's the problem. And I've been in the weeds with a lot of people buying properties. And I found some mistakes that people are making that you can overcome. They're not things that are insurmountable, but they're common enough that I wanted to share them with you. I want to unpack them today, explain some examples. And then, of course, Real Estate Deal School is a big part of my solution. I'm not saying you have to do that course, but I'm going to have a link to the course below in the video description and the podcast description if you're interested in enrolling. I happen to believe that's a great way. Getting coaching when I did sports, getting coaching for something and having somebody give you feedback is a great way to get better at something, and you make a lot of progress a lot faster. You can do things yourself as well, and that's a very viable way to do it. But I want to give you that opportunity today, and there'll be a link below. But listen to these examples, listen to these mistakes. Maybe one of these is something you're struggling with. If it is, hopefully it'll help you turn it around and make more progress today, this week, this month towards buying your next investment property. So let's jump right in with the first mistake that I'm seeing investors facing, and it's just this: having a lack of focus. So the very, very first step that I'm trying to help people with Real Estate Deal School is actually a little mini course called Find Your Focus. And the idea there is that if you aren't focused on a particular strategy and you think, well, I just want a good deal, I just want whatever is a good investment property that moves me forward, I just want to build wealth, it's so vague that you're probably going to spin your wheels. You're not going to be as effective. And the way I think about this, there's that classic example of how your brain works, that if you buy a car, like you end up getting a Toyota Camry, I'm just going to use Toyotas because I like Toyotas, and you get a silver Toyota Camry and you start driving it around, all of a sudden you'll notice there's tons of Toyota Camrys on the road. Have you ever seen how that works? Whatever your car might be, whatever types of clothing you buy, and there's a part of your brain, I don't remember the name of it right now, but there's a part of your brain that recognizes things that are familiar to you. And so part of the strategy of real estate investing, this focusing idea, is that if you focus on a strategy, if you go get really narrow with your approach, you'll end up seeing opportunities a lot more often. Now, one example, let's say that you are someone who's decided that your best strategy is to house hack. So you're going to move into a property, and there's different variations on house hacking, right? You can move into a duplex, a triplex. You can move into a house with a basement apartment or a garage apartment. You could even just move into a house and not rent it at all until later on when you move up to another house, and then you keep that as a rental. I call that a live-in then rent, but it's a variation of house hacking. The point is, that's a strategy that makes sense for a lot of people as new investors. Now, if that were your strategy, that's going to focus you on a particular type of property. It's probably going to focus you on a particular type of financing. It's going to focus on you on a particular part of the place you live in. You're not going to be investing long distance. You'll be local. You see how all these questions start answering themselves because you've chosen a strategy. Now, contrast that with if somebody said, I'm going to be somebody who flips properties. Well, the person flipping properties has a completely different type of financing than somebody who's house hacking, probably a different type of property that has more repairs. It's going to need to buy it at a lower price, probably going to take a different approach to finding that deal. There might be some crossover here and there, but my point is you have to get focused on a strategy in order to be focused on the tactics that you're going to use. A lot of people start with the tactics, how you're going to do something, how you're going to buy an investment, how you're going to finance it, how you're going to negotiate it. Those are great. Like, those are really important. You should spend a lot of time on that. But if you just focus on that before you get a clear strategy, you're going to be going all over the place, going down dead end roads, then turn around, and you're going to spin your wheels. You're going to get frustrated. That's what happens a lot. This is so common that I've tried to build that into a process of helping you focus right off the bat, very beginning. And once you do that, then let's go and learn about the tactics. And that'll lead me to a second mistake that I want to share next. Unrealistic expectations of what it means to have a good deal. That's the mistake number 2 that I'm seeing from investors. And one thing that gets in the way of them making progress as an investor. And I want to give you a story from me that might demonstrate a little bit of this problem when I've had it myself. Back in 2015, 16, we were kind of out of the recession, and we were feeling good about things. But my business partner and I, were out looking for properties. And there's one particular property, I was doing some marketing, and I got a call. It was 2 different parcels right next to each other. One was a 6-unit building, one was a duplex. And I was the only one who knew about this property. The seller called me directly, and I was talking to the seller, and I happened to own the property next door. That's why I was interested in it. I was familiar with it. And on the property next door was a multi-unit property, and we got one of the best deals we ever had. And it was 2 or 3 years earlier, so it was still kind of getting out of the recession, probably 2012, 13. And so there was still a lot of deals to be had in my market in Clemson, South Carolina. And so we got an incredible deal on a per unit basis. It was a 12-unit building. And when you looked at the per unit basis, it was like really, really low. I think we bought it for $200,000 plus some repairs probably, but 12 units for $200,000. Incredible. Like, less than $20,000 per unit. In our market, and the rents were like $500 maybe, $450. And here we're looking at this other building, and we're kind of had that deal in mind. And we're negotiating with the seller. The seller is at this one price. I think it was for this whole property was maybe $225,000, $230,000. I had in my mind that we had bought a better property for $200,000 earlier. Why would I want to pay that for this property? And so we went back and forth, had a gap there. And I missed some of the opportunity of this deal because of my getting stuck on the past. And guess what? I passed on the deal. Somebody else bought it. They paid that price. I think maybe even a little bit more, like $230,000. Fast forward 3 or 4 years later, we bought another property in the area nearby, and we were coming back to this property saying, why did we not buy that property? That's such a good location. If we have all these properties together, we now realize kind of the rents had gone up in that location. Things were getting better and better. And so now we went back to the owner of that property who was about to put it on the market, and we paid for that property, but we paid $100,000 more than what we could have bought it for 3 or 4 years earlier. And so the lesson there, the painful lesson for us, is that you can't always look at the past and judge that to say that's what a good deal is. But even more than that, you've got to understand the dynamics of both the economy you're in and the overall interest rate levels, but you also have to understand the dynamics of your market in particular. Different markets in the country give you different benefits and different challenges. And I know the classic example is if you're buying properties on the West Coast, the East Coast in New York, or maybe Bay Area of California or Los Angeles, that's a much different dynamic than buying properties in South Carolina, where I am. They're more cash flow centric markets. They're more growth centric markets, and they both have their benefits and drawbacks. But the fundamentals of analyzing a deal is understanding that the total benefit is what you're looking for. You're looking for a deal that doesn't have a lot of risk, that also has a lot of long-term benefit. And the beautiful thing about real estate is some deals produce a lot of cash flow and maybe a little bit of growth. That's maybe more like a cash flow centric market. Another deal might produce a lot less cash flow, but then a lot more growth over time. And how do you know a property produces growth? This is something I didn't understand early in my career, is you have to look at the dynamics and the fundamentals of population and job changes and supply and demand in that market. If you have a market where there's tons and tons of population growth, or just a steady population growth, and jobs are getting better and better, salaries are going up, and you have a limited supply of new construction, which is very common in a lot of markets. It's a problem for affordable housing because it's hard to build houses because of local zoning, local regulations. If that's the case and you own existing properties, you're tending to go up in value over time as long as that background dynamic of population growth is going on. That's been the case for a lot of places in California, for example, over the years. But on the surface, when you first bought the property, maybe you looked at it and said an unleveraged return or like a cap rate on that property is 3 or 4%. And that's a bad, quote, bad deal because you're looking at other properties in other locations, or maybe looking at what people bought in 2011 and 12. That's the mistake. So I'm not saying you should buy bad deals. I'm not saying you should do risky things. You still have to take care of your downside. You still have to reduce risk. But a big part of that mistake is the other side of solving that mistake is building a criteria for what it is for a good deal in your particular market at your particular time and figuring out how's this going to make me money? How's this going to avoid any big risk and problems? And then once you have that criteria, be laser focused on it. And if it meets your criteria, do it. If it doesn't, pass. And you're going to often pass on deals. That's okay. But what I'm saying the mistake is passing 100% of the time because you have such unrealistic expectations. Perfect is the enemy of the good. Remember that. You're never going to be perfect, but you can have a deal that's good enough that can make you a lot of money over the long run and that can keep you in the game. Okay, mistake number 3 that I'm seeing that's keeping investors from buying more investment properties is the do-it-yourself mentality where you're trying to do it all yourself. Real estate is a team sport. And this reminds me of one of my favorite basketball coaches of the past, John Wooden. He was a kind of 10-time national champion at UCLA and just a really smart guy. And I love reading his little book called Wooden. There's just many gems of wisdom if you want to check that out. But Wooden would always say that, hey, if you want to be the star, if you want to be the all-star, like the basketball context, you want to be the best player, then the secret ingredient to that, the number one ingredient, is your team. You can't do it without the rest of your team. Now, there's some context, if you're a track runner running a 100-meter dash, like it's all on you, right? That's all about you. But real estate is not that kind of sport. Real estate is a team sport. It's more like football. Like when I used to play linebacker, I had some great seasons where I thought I was pretty good, but I probably individually played above my level because the team around me was so good. I had other years where I thought I was pretty prepared and I had done a really good job, but I did not perform that well because our team didn't do that well. And that's what real estate is like as well. So if you want to buy more properties, instead of just sitting on your computer, focusing on looking on Zillow, trying to do everything yourself, the key components are your team members. In particular, if you're brand new, I think a real estate agent can be really helpful. You don't have to buy with a real estate agent, but finding the right investor-friendly agent can make all the difference in finding good deals. Similarly, if you're going to be a rental property investor, I actually recommend you manage some properties yourself at some point. That way you can learn the process. But if you're really busy, if you only have a little bit of time, and particularly if you're long distance buying properties, having a property manager can be critical as a team member. And they also help you, just as an example, one of the key components of running numbers on a good deal is figuring out the rent on that deal. And my favorite way to figure out the rent is having a property manager who understands the market, who can tell you and give you feedback, like real-time feedback. This is what that property will probably rent for. I've got 5 other properties very similar to that. They all rented for that. And so that kind of feedback is incredible. It's better than Zillow. It's better than some of the algorithms because they're on the ground. They're doing it. They know it. So team members, those are just 2 specific examples, probably 2 of your most important team members. But of course, there's contractors, there's attorneys, there's surveyors, depending on what you need. Focus. And here's the takeaway is that focus and build a plan around building your team. That might mean going out and networking at meetups. That might mean actually interviewing, just saying my to-do list this week is interviewing 5 real estate agents or 5 property managers and screen them with criteria that make for a good team member or not. Because to the extent that they're an all-star, they're going to make you an all-star as well. Okay, the 4th mistake I'm seeing is that people are making too much of a focus on the outcome or the goal, which in our context here is finding a good deal, and less focus on the process, which is actually the most important part, the steps you take to get to that outcome. Now, I'm going to borrow another John Wooden story. There's a story about him with his championship teams. He would recruit some of the best players, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who's an all-star Hall of Famer in the NBA, Bill Walton, all sorts of amazing players. But on the very first day of practice, he would spend the entire time, like an hour, teaching his players how to put on their socks and how to tie their shoes correctly. Now, can you imagine that? Like, here's the best player in the country. He's recruited out of high school, and he's teaching them how to put his socks on. And he would kind of get them to the point where they were really frustrated. Like, what are we doing? We're like putting our socks on. I want to go shoot. I want to go play. And he would say, you're probably wondering why this is so important. Well, this is so important because if you don't put your sock on correctly and you start practicing on it and you have a wrinkle or you have your socks on wrong or your shoes tied incorrectly, you're more likely to get a blister, you're more likely to get injured. And it starts as a small thing, but then if you miss a practice or 2 or 3, then you won't play as well as you want in the game. If you don't play as well as you want in the game, we're not going to win games or we're not going to win a championship. And you all came here to win championships. And so the championship and winning games was the outcome for their basketball team. Similarly, in real estate, our outcome is we want to make offers. We want to buy properties. We want to use those properties to build wealth. We want to have wealth to have financial independence. That's the outcome that we want. But the focus, 99% of your effort and your time should be on the process. And that's a big part of really what all of my real estate deal school is about. It is the process. It's me kind of dissecting and saying, here's what's worked for me. Here's what's worked for other people. Let's just take this step by step by step. So for example, when you're buying properties, the step before buying the property is you need to make offers. You can't buy a property unless you make offers. So often when I'm doing one-on-one consulting, when I did that in the past, or group consulting in these classes, I get a complaint, I'm not buying enough properties. It's too competitive out there. And my question is, well, how many offers have you made? And almost always it's like 1, 2, maybe 3 offers. And my feedback is you're not making enough offers. You're not doing enough activity. You're not focusing on the process enough. So what do you have to do to make offers? You've got to go back a few more steps. You've got to build a team like we just talked about. You've got to study your market. That's another process step. You've got to get pre-approved for financing. You've got to get out there and generate some leads. How are you going to find good opportunities? Sometimes MLS is all you need, but you also need to do other ways. Driving for dollars. You need to get out and network with other people. And so those are all things you can control. You can do that. And I actually, back in 2007, in my own real estate investing business, I had a mentor who taught me this, and it really worked very well. It was the best year of acquiring properties I ever had. We had 33 closings, but my focus week by week was not on doing deals. It was how many offers did I make? How many follow-ups did I make? How much lead generation did I do? These were all things at the beginning of the day I could make a goal based on the process. And if you understand the process and you do it and you're enthusiastic, it's just a matter of time until it works. So that is mistake number 4, not focusing enough on the process, focusing too much on the goals. That leads me to mistake number 5, which is actually very closely connected to the process, and it's being too impatient. So this mistake is thinking you should get results overnight just because you've done the process a little bit. So you have to stick with it. And it's impossible to tell ahead of time whether your process and your efforts and you're doing is going to take 3 weeks to be successful or 6 months to be successful. But all I can tell you is that if you're persistent in following the process, and if you're flexible enough to adjust as needed. Like think about a sailboat or something. Like a sailboat, it uses the wind, and it depends on the wind. So you can't just say, I'm going to go to that point in the ocean. You actually have to use the wind and say, all right, the wind's taking me this way. I can kind of go across the wind and back and back. You set your sails. That's what you can control, and you can know the destination you're trying to get to, but the speed you're going to get there depends on the wind. It depends on the direction of the wind, how powerful the wind is. That's very much similar to you as a real estate investor. You just got to be persistent. You got to be patient and knowing that you can control some things, but there's other things you can't control. There's dynamics outside of your control. And so persistence and patience is the attitude you have to stick with it. And there's a story that I had with one of my favorite stories is that Michael Wynn, who's actually the editor of the podcast now, that's what we met originally though, when he took the real estate deal school course, and he was making offers on properties. He had actually took the course to learn it and saved up his money for a couple of years actually, until he had enough down payment. And then he started making offers on properties. And I think he got like 8 or 9 offers in. He had a good team member, a good real estate agent, and he got frustrated. He came back and talked to me and said, I think I'm just going to take a break because it's just, I've been doing everything, but it's probably not working right now. I just want to take a break, travel a little bit. And I said, Mike, if you want to do that, that's great. It's up to you to do it. My recommendation though is keep persisting a little bit longer. And let's just set a number. Let's say if you make 15 offers and it's still not working, maybe we need to revisit things. Let's take a break. Maybe you need to adjust your strategy, your market, but stick with it a little bit longer. And he did. And I think it was 2 or 3 offers later on like offer number 11, he finally got his deal. he had been getting outbid by some people. He had some properties, maybe he was learning the numbers and he didn't quite know exactly what he should offer. But by making the practice of being persistent and learning each step of the way, he ultimately got a deal that it was a house hack for him. He moved in one unit, rented out the other unit, and he now has 2 units, and he's moved on from there. But if he had given up, if he had quit at that point, he never would have seen the results that he wanted and he ended up getting in the end. So I think a lot of us, I'm not saying be stupid about your persistence, doing the same thing over and over again for years. You got to be flexible, but so many people are quitting too early before you finally see results. That's mistake number 5. And just remember the story of Mike and how he had to persist to get his next deal. So there you have it, the 5 mistakes. I want to repeat and summarize what those mistakes are again. Number 1 is a lack of focus. Having all sorts of strategies instead of 1, maybe 2 strategies. Get crystal clear and you'll start seeing more opportunities. Number 2, what does it mean to have a good deal? Be realistic about your expectations. You're not going to make a bad deal. You're not going to do something that's risky, but also don't live in 7 years ago market instead of what's realistic today. Number 3, build a team. Being an all-star, being a star of your real estate team, it means the number 1 ingredient is building a good team around you. Number 4, follow the process. Make sure you look at the steps that it takes to get to a goal and spend 99% of your energy and time on the process. Actually measure your success from week to week based on how well you're following the process. And then number 5, patience and persistence. That's only you can decide to do that. If you quit too soon, you'll never know what could have happened. And I just want to say, I mentioned in the beginning, this is all, I've been trying to help people solve these problems as a real estate investor coach, as a teacher for the last, really since 2009 when I started coaching and doing masterminds with people. And there's no perfect recipe for solving this, but I feel like I've got some good ingredients here. Real Estate Deal School is my best effort to build a community and to build a process to help you master these steps. And it's very much focused 100% on buying properties. There's in the future, I want to teach more courses on property management and some other things within the real estate investing business. But I really feel that if you master this skill of buying good deals, everything else becomes so much easier. And that's what I love to help you do. If you're listening to this week, there's some urgency on this just because it's only open for a week. It closes on Monday. That is March the 7th. So that in the evening, that's the last day to sign up for it this spring. And I would love for you to check it out. There'll be links to the course in the video description and the podcast description. Check it out. See if it's right for you. If you're someone who's buying properties directly and wants help, wants some guidance, wants some support from a community, it's a 9-week course. Every single week I'm teaching, I'm giving office hours so you can ask me questions. I get to know you, I get to know your situation. We'll help personalize approach that makes sense for you. We'll help you build a team, help you get criteria, help you learn your local market, and we'll help you eventually. The whole goal of this course is you making offers on properties and following that process until you eventually, if you're persistent and patient, you'll end up buying your own property. And that's the goal. That's when I get to high five you. I send you a deal diploma once you've done your first deal. And that's one of my favorite things to do. So I hope you'll check that out. If you have any feedback, I always love to hear from you about the podcast in general. Send an email to podcast@coachcarson.com. And I look forward to seeing you in our normal recorded episodes and YouTube videos later in the week.